In the early morning hours of February 25, 1942, something happened that would cause Los Angeles to become riddled with terror, firing weapons, and sounding alarms. What was it? An air attack? A UFO? Or something else? Let's explore.
Hi, I'm Drew, and that's Bethany. Welcome to the Odysseys podcast.
In this podcast, we're trading in our typical visual storytelling that we do on YouTube to sit down and discuss oddities that no longer exist or can't be captured on film or ones that we just can't stop thinking about.
Right. Like this week's episode, we're going to be talking about the Battle of Los Angeles. Now, the Battle of Los Angeles was an event that happened in the early morning hours of February 25th, 1942. So a long time ago.
We were not there.
We were definitely not around, and I don't really think there's anybody left who was around, and if they were, they would have been we.
Unfortunately, no, because there's so many questions that we would have for people who were there that night.
Yes.
Today, it remains one of Los Angeles' biggest unexplained mysteries.
Definitely.
So, long story short, we have been fascinated by the Battle of Los Angeles for a long time and had plans to film the reenactment of the Great Air Raid, as it's also called, at Fort MacArthur. Sadly, we learned after we bought our tickets that it wasn't going to happen.
Yeah, they have a really good reenactment there every year. And then, of course, COVID happened. This past year, they were planning on holding it. We were really excited. And then they found out that a great horned owl was spotted in the trees near Battery Osgood Farley, where they generally hold the event. And so, as per California law, they were unable to hold any events with loud noises within 300 feet of the great horned owl's nest. So, hopefully, this owl will find a new home before next year, because I'd really like to go to this reenactment still.
Alas, we didn't want the research that we had put into the episode to go to waste, so we thought we would just sit down and kind of unpack the Battle of Los Angeles.
Let's get to it.
Let's get to it. So for those who are unfamiliar, and maybe for a recap for those who are familiar, how would you sum up the Battle of Los Angeles?
Well,
that's a tall order right now.
That's a big question. Well, as I said, in the early morning hours of February 25th, 1942, just a couple months after the attack at Pearl Harbor, an object, or perhaps multiple objects, were detected by radar, by eyewitness accounts, etc., flying over the Los Angeles area. It caused quite a bit of panic. There was a blackout. There were searchlights. There was even a barrage of anti-aircraft fire that went off that night. 5
people died that night, and there was a lot of damage from friendly fire just because everyone was on alert.
Let's talk about those 5 people that died that night. How did they die?
3 died from vehicle accidents. I believe one was a police officer in Long Beach, because at that time, it's already, driving in the middle of the night is already going to be difficult. But then you add in a blackout where everything is pitch black, plus you have,
sprinkle in some explosions overhead.
Hot rain coming down of ammunition.
Yeah.
And that did cause 3 accidents, which were fatal. Mm-hmm. The other 2 were heart attacks. And people who, just because of the stress of the alarms and the firing, their bodies just couldn't handle it. So at least 5 people were reported as passing away that night due to the events of the Battle of Los Angeles. Absolute chaos is what happened. And there are 3 major theories as to what it was that caused the Battle of Los Angeles, because to this day, it's unknown.
Right.
80 years later, we still have no idea what the heck set this whole thing off. So with that, we wanted to kind of dissect the evidence that can either help or debunk these 3 theories. Mm-hmm. I love the word debunk. It reminds me of the X-Files.
It reminds me of jumping off of a bunk bed when I was a child.
There you have it. So theory number 1 is that what caused the Battle of Los Angeles was a UFO-alien spacecraft. Drew right now is jumping at the bit, and I think he needs to explain why he's irked.
Thank you for making the distinction between a UFO and an alien spacecraft, because they are very different things. UFO, in case you're unaware, stands for Unidentified Flying Object. which is anything you see in the sky that cannot be identified by traditional means. Okay? Since when did that become synonymous with extraterrestrials? I don't know. But in, I think, a lot of circles it has been. No, when we say UFO, we simply mean an object seen in the sky that has not been identified.
As you can tell, this really bothers him.
It really does.
Okay, so let's clarify. In this podcast, when we say UFO, we mean just that, an unidentified flying object, but it could be an unidentified flying object of extraterrestrial origin.
Yes, that doesn't mean we're not going to be talking about aliens tonight.
Theory number 1, the Battle of Los Angeles was caused by a UFO or a UFO of extraterrestrial origin. Why do people think this? For starters, there is the famous photograph. This photograph was published on the LA Times page B the morning after. So it was referenced as the best, if not one of the only photographs taken that night of what occurred. So before we get into the contents of the photograph, which is very important, there's a little side story that I think needs to be touched on.
I love side stories.
We love side stories around here. So this photo was published in the Los Angeles Times, therefore it was always credited as an LA Times photo. More recently, within the past 5 or 6 years, it has come to light that this may have been an Associated Press photo.
Indeed.
What backs this up? Well, David Marler, who is a incredible, intelligent UFO researcher, claims to own a copy of the original photograph. Where did he get this photograph?
eBay.
Off of eBay. How did you know? You guessed, didn't you? Everybody gets everything off of eBay these days, even historical photos. So he buys this photograph, knowing exactly what he's looking at, and he contacts the seller. The seller tells him that he purchased the photograph in a box at a garage sale. This is why I'm always saying we need to go to more garage sales. I feel like we're missing out on some pretty fantastic historical artifacts.
Well, I certainly have no argument at the moment.
So this seller, who is a garage sale enthusiast, bought this box of photographs and negatives from the granddaughter of an Associated Press photographer.
Wow, okay.
To correlate this, around the same time, a documentary crew was filming about the Battle of Los Angeles, and they talked to the LA Times archivist, Simon Elliott, who brings out the negative that they used to publish in the newspaper. He's looking at this and going, that's odd. I've never seen that before. And this man has been doing this for decades. And they ask him what? And he says the notch code on this negative is different than the other notch codes in the film.
So what does that mean?
That means that this negative was taken from a different stock of film than that of the LA Times photos.
Got it.
It's an odd man out. It does not belong there. So that tied with David Marler's claim to own the original photograph, which has an AP teletype on the back. Long story short, this was not an LA Times photo. This was an AP photo.
Sounds to me like LA Times just didn't have a good enough photo to run in the newspapers, so they probably procured one.
It could have also
from elsewhere.
Right. It could also been a morning of chaos to try to publish everything as quickly as you could, given what happened the night before, and no one was really, double checking their work.
Right.
But what reads on the back of the original photo is the AP teletype. I'm going to read this because I thought it was interesting.
Please.
It starts with use credit. I guess that did not happen very well. This picture shows how Los Angeles' noisy sky drama of the early morning hours of February 25th, in which anti-aircraft guns pumped into a patch of sky, looked to the average Los Angeles resident who got up to watch it. The little round white dots were made of the exploding shells. Many persons saw a slow-moving object was the target of the guns, but hours later, the Army still had not identified it. So with that, what does the photograph show?
Well, it depends on which version you're looking at. The image that appears in the LA Times is a little bit doctored. Not that that's a terrible, terrible thing. The newspapers doctor images quite often. It's a pretty normal thing to happen. So there is a little bit of tweaking on the light levels. I think a couple of searchlights were added.
Well, what does it show if you had to say? Yeah.
But what does it show? Supposedly it shows an object in the sky, rather round-shaped object, and a number of searchlights pointing at it, taken from somewhere in the Baldwin Hills, if I recall. But the thing is, the picture that appears in the newspaper, the searchlights have been brightened. I think there were even a couple searchlights added. And because of that, the central point where all the lights converge has been blown out, meaning that in photographic language, they've approached and reached total white, meaning that you can't get any brighter than that. And what it's created, at least to my eyes, is an oval, like a bubble, where all you're seeing is pure white. And to the untrained eye, that could look like an actual physical object. But if you look at the undoctored photo, it's a lot less bright. You don't see an oval-shaped object there. The only thing you do see are small explosions, which I assume would be from the anti-aircraft barrage that was going on at the time the photo was taken.
Well, alien enthusiasts believe that the searchlights are all converging onto an oval object, which is an alien spacecraft. What it is interesting to note that of all the photos taken that night, and there weren't a lot, I think maybe 5 or 6 good ones emerged. This is the only one that shows all of the searchlights converging into one area.
Right.
So why is that? Why are they all pointed onto one spot, whereas in the other photos, searchlights are all over the place and they can't find a good focus point? How do you think that happened?
That is a good point. And it certainly cannot be debunked by looking at the original photo, because there are, in fact, several searchlights that do converge at one point in the sky. So why they were all pointed there, I don't know. Maybe somebody said, hey, look over there, point the lights over there, and they, we don't know what happened first. Did the lights converge on a singular point in sky, and then the barrage aimed at that same spot? Or did the barrage come first and then the searchlights? We don't know.
So this photograph is referenced as a solid piece of evidence toward the theory that it was an alien spacecraft by UFO enthusiasts. It has been a photo that they look at and they go, this is it. This is one of the first documented cases of alien life form in the United States. Okay. But others have said what you said, where it was probably doctored up. And if you look at it, the original negative, and look at it closely, it may have just been nothing at all. It may have been a dust cloud from the explosions that were happening around it, which caused the oval shape, which caused maybe the different light density and all those other things.
Right, and that's what I see when I look at it, regardless of what version of the photo I'm looking at. I do not see a hard, possibly metallic object up there or anything like that. I see light bouncing off of smoke and clouds and bursts of anti-aircraft fire. And that's all I see.
So that is the photo. I think you have to kind of look at it for yourself and make your own opinions about it.
Indeed.
But it is one that has generated quite a bit of chatter in 80 years as to, does this photo prove or debunk that it was a UFO or a UFO of extraterrestrial origin that caused the Battle of Los Angeles?
Yeah.
So what set everything off? What was it that tipped the scale? And for this, I think we need to go into the radar readings.
The radar readings. Should I do a play-by-play?
What do you know about the radar readings?
There is a lot we do know and a lot we don't know about the radar readings from that night. They began around 1:44 a.m. That is when the first radar picked up an object, or possibly multiple objects, flying towards Los Angeles off the coast of Santa Monica.
Right.
And at the time that this object was detected, it was about 200 miles off the Santa Monica coast. At around 2 a.m., the object was reported at about 120 miles off the coast. At 2:15 a.m., the AA was put on alert. At 2:25, there was they called for a blackout across the entire city.
That would have been scary.
Yeah. Also around 2:25 a.m., 2 other radar stations also confirmed that there was indeed an object flying in towards Santa Monica. And at 3 a.m., 25 airplanes were reported just a few miles off the coast. Okay? And then at 3:06 is when the anti-aircraft barrage supposedly began. So I would assume that was as soon as the planes made landfall, they ordered, take them out.
I need to pick apart the radar readings.
I
for a
wish
minute.
I wish you would.
Very important. So at the time, there were only two types of radar systems, the SCR-268 and the SCR-270. The SCR-268 had a reading range of 22 miles, could only see as far as 22 miles. The 270 had a reading range of 120 miles out. So guess which system picked up the first indicators of a UFO that night?
I believe it was the 268. Am I correct?
It was the 268.
Which is interesting.
How does a radar with only a 22-mile reading radius pick up an object 120 plus miles out?
It's an excellent question. I wonder if the radar was rated for a particular distance, but it could still somewhat detect objects further away?
Perhaps.
That's an idea.
Location is important.
Yeah.
Now, as far as the location of the radar in question, that is still unknown. To this day, that is still classified information. Mm-hmm. So the crew that allegedly spotted this UFO, as well as the exact location of the radar itself, is still concealed. Now, could that be because this is a cover-up and they didn't want that information leaked? Because that would give us, the radar readings from the 268 would give us the altitude, would give us the height, would give us everything that we wanted to know about that UFO.
Right.
And no crew members ever came forward saying, I was the one that spotted this in the sky. I also think that is something that is important, that's missing. Mm-hmm. Or could it be that it was just embarrassing that all this happened because it was a false reading and it was just kind of tossed away, right? Because this is all based off of everyone's recollection from that night.
Right.
So we don't have the hard data that says this radar reading said this.
Right.
We just have what one or two people said happened that night.
Right. We have the first and some mostly secondhand accounts of everything.
So this is very important because the radar readings is another piece of evidence that people hang their hats on to say there was something in the sky that night. Mm-hmm. Now, where are they getting this from? What's the source? Well, the source is from a declassified government document that is ridiculously long, so we're not going to read everything. But I do have the excerpt, word for word, which is cited as the piece of evidence that says a radar picked up an object that night, which I'm going to have you read.
Oh, lucky me. At 01:44 hours, an SCR-268 picked up an unidentifiable aerial target confirmed by two 270s. At 0200, there appeared on Information Center's operation board an unidentified target 120 miles west of Los Angeles, well tracked by radar by First Lieutenant Kenneth R. Martin.
Okay, now this is from the history of the 4th AA Command. This was part of an investigation that took quite a while to put together. Mm-hmm. Again, this document was over 100 pages long. I read about 30 of the pages pertaining to the Battle of Los Angeles and some interesting stuff. A lot of conflicting reports. A lot of people saying one thing and a lot of people saying another thing. So the person who said this was Major Durham, right? And it's so funny. In this document, what you just read is in quotations. Mm-hmm. So it's him saying that the radar picked it up, but there's nothing to follow up saying, but here's the radar reading from that night. Mm-hmm. So this is from Major Milton E. Durham and his account as quoted in the History of Los Angeles Fighter Wing. He also went on to say in his recap of that night that the air over Los Angeles erupted like a volcano.
Mm. The second prevailing theory was that it was in fact a squadron of Japanese planes sent to attack possibly Los Angeles. And we do have eyewitness accounts that back this up. People did say that they saw and heard planes in the sky that morning.
And it was expected because not only did we have Pearl Harbor happen and we had government officials saying that an attack was coming to the West Coast, but we also had the February 23rd incident where a Japanese I-17 submarine fired 13 shells into the Elwood oil field, which is about 10 miles from Santa Barbara.
Right.
No fatalities, not a lot of damage, but it did escalate everyone's mindset of war coming from a 7 to about a 10 plus.
Yeah, yeah. Whether intentionally or not, it was a psychological attack more than anything.
Right.
You could equate it to a more modern event like 9/11, where imagine 9/11 happened 2 months ago, and then last night a plane slammed into your neighbor's house. So you'd be very much on edge, I would say. And I think that's what the people of LA were feeling, that the war was getting just a little too close to home. And so everybody, military included, they had their eyes on the skies that night.
Right. So with the theory of planes, this is something else that no one can agree on. For the eyewitnesses, you have civilians saying they did see planes and civilians saying that they didn't see planes. Mm-hmm. You had government officials such as General John DeWitt saying that there were no planes in the air, yet Secretary of War Henry Stimson said that spy crafts were in the air.
Yeah.
And these are two people who would know. So that's another thing where no one could just meet in the middle and say, hey guys, this is what happened and this is what didn't happen.
Right. Even the 37th Coast Artillery Brigade reported seeing 6 distinct planes over Los Angeles that night.
I would imagine that with 1,430 rounds being shot into the sky, that something would come down.
Now, I did see a report that there was a plane shot down over the ocean and another one shot down over the San Bernardino Mountains. But neither of those reports are confirmed. So, can we really throw that into evidence? Probably not.
There is a piece of evidence that can lean on the side that there were spy crafts in the air that night. And this is a letter from Sergeant B.M. Craw, who I believe his name was Buck. And he was part of the 78th Coast AA. It's a very charming letter, 3 or 4 pages long, and he talks about his wife Dorothy and how she's stationed not far from him and they go dancing. But one little section that I found interesting was a section in which he talks about the Battle of Los Angeles as he witnessed it.
It reads, regardless of what you folks back home have read in the newspapers about the air raid on Los Angeles and Long Beach a few weeks ago, and the possibility no planes were sighted is erroneous. The fact still remains that some 15,000 soldiers in our brigade witnessed the flight of the planes above us at 3 o'clock in the morning. 15,000.
That's a lot.
So he's supposedly vouching for 15,000 witnesses here. Continuing on. All the firing was done by our brigade, and we know. One dud landed half a block from our place and exploded, causing extensive damage to several store windows and fronts. There was much excitement that morning, and watching the searchlights and shells bursting in the air presented quite a picture. Of course, the entire town of Long Beach was blacked out during the barrage and remained so until morning.
So our friend there is saying that there were indeed spy crafts in the air that night, and they shot something down.
He's even saying that you cannot deny this. 15,000 witnesses saw this, and he can vouch for every one of them.
That's just so incredible to me that even the people there that night can't say for sure, that they can't back up their own theories.
So why would he say that? Is he that confident in his 15,000 men, or did he want to paint a picture that, we weren't just accidentally firing at nothing. There was a target, and we fired upon it.
He does write in this letter that people back home have been talking about it for a while. Mm-hmm. So because he was there, he may have just wanted to set the record straight that it wasn't all futile, that they weren't just shooting aimlessly into the sky, because that could be quite embarrassing.
Yeah. He's writing this to make it sound definitive, whether it was or not. He's saying, this is what happened. The thing is, when you're talking about eyewitness accounts like this, you cannot necessarily say that two conflicting reports are mutually exclusive. You have some people saying they saw a slow-moving object in the sky. You have some people saying they saw planes in the sky. You have some people saying that they saw nothing in the sky. All 3 of those could potentially be true. Los Angeles is a huge area. You could have seen one thing over here and something completely different over here. So I don't think those necessarily contradict each other to the point where you have to throw out one side or the other. They could both be true. they could also both be false.
In 2004, Hillhauser conducted an interview with a group of people who were at Fort MacArthur and surrounding areas that night. And he asked each of them, well, what did you see? One woman who lived in Whittier said that she came running out of her house because she heard the gunfire and looked up and thought she saw planes. But Hillhauser asked her, oh, how many planes did you see? And she's like, actually, you know what? No, it may have just been the searchlights.
Yeah.
He asked another gentleman who was stationed outside on the main road. And this gentleman, who was part of the AA, said that he saw nothing at all, that it was a clear night, and he didn't see anything until he saw gun smoke in the air and ammunition exploding around him. He asked another gentleman who was stationed at the Korean temple, and this guy was told by his commanding officer to fire. And he said, at what, sir? I don't see anything. So all of these people who were there that night, and he asked a whole group for their accounts, not one person could say exactly what they saw, except for the ones who said they saw nothing. They were the ones who were 100% and said, I was there, my own two eyes were in the sky, there was no UFO, there were no spy crafts, it was just chaos from searchlights and gun smoke and ammunition, but nothing else. It was all friendly fire.
Right. And perhaps a useful aside to that is that the human mind inherently is pretty frail when it comes to remembering things correctly, which is a little scary given that eyewitness accounts are so prevalent
they're used in court.
In court cases. Right. But really, we don't remember things very well in general. So, and added to the fact that these people were, some 60 or 70 years removed from the event, who's to say, honestly, with all respect to them, I wouldn't give any of their eyewitness accounts a huge amount of weight for those reasons.
And it was the middle of the night. It was 3 a.m. Yeah. I think everyone is so disoriented at that time and half asleep.
That's the darkest hour.
And it was blackout. So I just think, I lament that there was no video taken that night. I really do. There was that one photo that was taken that was published in the LA Times, a couple of other photos sprinkled about, some eyewitness accounts, but there's just no video. And that to me is just, even audio recording. I would love to have a piece of audio recording just to kind of hear the conversations that were going on that night between the AA and the civilians as to what they were thinking and seeing and feeling in those moments. But we have no video.
We've got something on radar here. Oh my God, what is that?
That would be amazing. Maybe one day something will emerge that will change the story. But this leads us to the final theory. It was nothing at all.
It was
a false alarm and a case of things gone horribly wrong. Some of our friends at Fort MacArthur stand by this theory, and they ask that people not call it a conspiracy theory, that they're concealing evidence and they're hiding away, pieces of evidence in their bunkers at Fort MacArthur. They're just saying, please, friends, let's remember that night for what it was in the history books, but it was nothing more.
Right.
But on the other side, you do have your UFO alien enthusiast who are saying what happened on the Battle of Los Angeles is the first real documented case in history of America, because shortly after that, in 1947, is when the Kenneth Arnold sightings happened. And that coined the term flying saucer. That's when the Roswell, New Mexico incident happened. So all the UFO alien enthusiasts are saying, guys, the Battle of Los Angeles is it. It is what set the stage for aliens to visit us. And we have proof of that. To this day, 80 years later, you still have side A and side B.
Yeah.
And there's not been one piece of evidence that ties both together that makes everybody happy.
Right. And it is interesting that before World War II, UFO sightings were pretty scarce. And then, of course, after...
They weren't documented at all.
Right. And then after World War II, you know, they're a dime a dozen. You get a UFO sighting every day now, so...
Right. The Battle of Los Angeles happened at a very quintessential alien documentation time.
Correct. Yeah. It was definitely one of the first moments.
I have a theory...
What is your
that
theory?
I toyed with after just researching and kind of digging into all of this a little bit. And the idea was that what if there was something in the sky that night But it wasn't a Japanese spycraft. It wasn't even one of our own planes. It wasn't a UFO of extraterrestrial origin. It wasn't a weather balloon. That was also something that was talked about quite a bit, was maybe it was a weather balloon. I think those would be too fragile. I think that would have been shot down and at least recovered. But I was toying with the idea that maybe it was an amateur engineering group, a basement group, call it that you will, and they built some kind of device that they wanted to toy with and throw up in the air and see if it would fly. Wow. And that was what was picked up on radar. It came over to the coast, was shot at, maybe damaged, but whatever they constructed it from was durable enough to keep it lasting long enough to go back over the ocean and to crash. And they never came forward with it because they were too scared after seeing what happened in the newspapers to claim it as their own.
That's quite a theory. Something built by a bunch of
civilians,
garage civilians, that could withstand an hour-long barrage by anti-aircraft fire.
Well,
that's tough.
The United States Air Force got into it with the Northern Illinois Bottle Cap Balloon Brigade because these guys were building these devices that were passing for spycraft because they were so elaborately built, and they kept getting shot down because they were seen as threats. Come to find out, it was a bunch of guys in their basement building devices that were getting them into some serious trouble.
Well, that lends credence to what you're saying. Could be something similar happened on that night. I doubt it, though.
I know. I just had to throw it out there that maybe there's another theory that no one's taking seriously.
Could be. It could be.
So, the Battle of Los Angeles, what do you think? Was it a UFO, an alien spacecraft, enemy aircraft, or nothing at all? We'll never know.
We may never know. But even if we never find out for sure what happened that night, it's always fun to speculate and talk about it. And we'll see what more evidence comes to light.
And perhaps one day we will get the chance to go film the reenactment of the Battle of Los Angeles at Fort MacArthur.
Yeah. So awesome.
That would be a lot of fun.
Until then, keep listening to our podcast, keep watching our episodes, and we'll see you on the next one.
Bye, friends.